Yeah. Yeah. As people move forward, we'll be able to add more chairs in the back. So if people could take the seats up here, we'll be able to get the program started. Thank you. Okay, we're going to start the program now. If people could please take their seats. Thank you very much. We're going to be getting started.
We're going to head northwest on Massachusetts Avenue now. The Chilean embassy is just a long block and a half down, the Chancery, and then the ambassador's residence is right off Sheridan Circle, maybe just a few houses down, which is where Orlando Letelier used to hang out when he was ambassador during the early years of the Allende presidency. I had a film that we had shot in Chile called ¿Qué hacer?, or What is to be Done. All of the minister counselors were told to go see the film because it was shot in Chile and it took place during the election campaign of Salvador Allende. And Letelier invited me to lunch to discuss the film, and I heard from each one of the minister counselors a blistering critique because I had not done justice to their political party, the socialists, the communists, the radicals, and so on. Letelier said that he personally liked the film. That was interesting, and that began our relationship. We wanted to work, of course, to bring democracy back to Chile and on human rights in general. And both Mark Raskin and Dick Barnett, who were the co-directors of IPS, thought it was a good idea. And we hired him. He didn't stay all that long because Pinochet blamed him for several of the bad things that were happening to Chile as a result of Pinochet's human rights violations. The Kennedy Amendment, which cut off all arms sales and shipments to Chile, and then the Harkin Amendment, which cut off all the rest except for humanitarian aid. And although Orlando was not responsible for either one of these, Pinochet in his narrow-shaped brain, of course, blamed him. And he ordered the head of the secret police, Manuel Contreras, who was a colonel, to do the job. Contreras, in turn, picked Michael Townley to organize the mission. Here we are. Nobody who was ever involved with these two people will or could ever forget this horrible day. It was, I remember, a warm, slightly drizzly morning. Orlando's car came to rest just here at the embassy doorstep. Townley had put the bomb at a place in the I-beam where the bomb would blow straight up. Ronnie was sitting in the seat next to him and just took a piece of metal in the throat, and that wiped her out. I've just felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow and sadness, but I also felt that we have got to get the people who did this. And there was no question in my mind that the only possible suspect was named Augusto Pinochet. But Pinochet never got his name on that indictment with the signature of the U.S. attorney. And that was a tragic blow to American justice.
I remember the first year that I was at IPS and people were making plans to go to the Sheridan Circle program, and I was thinking, well, why should I go to that? I didn't know Orlando and Ronnie personally. Eventually I got it, that this is really as much about the broader pursuit of justice for human rights as it is about honoring these two particular individuals. And then later, when Saul was planning to move from Washington to California, he wanted someone to kind of pick up the torch and take on some of the work related to Pinochet, and I was happy to do that and got much more involved at that point. I think it's hard to be a woman at IPS and not think of yourself in relation to Ronnie Carpen Moffett. You know, when I first started at IPS, I was just slightly older than Ronnie was at the time she was killed. My work is quite different from hers. You know, she did the very important work in our development office, and she was also into the arts and music. She ran a music carryout that made musical instruments available to people of all income levels. You can't help but think, that could have been me.
She was a woman who was liked by everybody at the Institute for Policy Studies. She had no enemies. She was sweet as could be, and was a very good worker and very dedicated to her job.
In the campaign to bring Pinochet to justice, IPS was like the glue that connected the lawyers and the family members of Orlando and Ronnie to historians and human rights activists and people who are experts on declassification. And we used media and lobbying strategies, and we did demonstrations to push for Pinochet to be extradited to stand trial in Spain, and also for the U.S. to indict him for the Letelier-Moffett case. And in the end, yes, Pinochet died without having to face trial, but so much had been accomplished, and he died with many criminal cases against him on everything from human rights violations to tax evasion. He died in disgrace.
Pinochet, although he was accused of a lot of crimes, died without having to face justice. Hopefully in the afterlife he got it.
Many years, IPS has taken Sheridan Circle, this place with a big war hero at the center of it, and turned it from a place to glorify militarism into a place to honor Orlando and Ronnie and to honor the pursuit of peace, justice, and dignity. We also every year hold the Human Rights Award event in their names to both honor Letelier and Moffett, but also to hold up new heroes and to encourage new human rights heroes in the U.S. and the Americas.
Ronnie's life was cut short at 25, but she'd already made a big contribution to the world, and these young people are too.
History is not only behind us, it's also ahead of us. We live in history. We are making history every single day, and we try to figure out where it's going.
We were so hoping that Saul would be here for the launch of this film, which he worked on with his former student, Farah Hassan, for the 50th anniversary. When it became clear that that was very unlikely, he said he still wanted us to show it at this program. And that was no surprise, because the film is about an event that was a defining event of Saul's life. And his pursuit of justice for his colleagues was an example of the traits that defined his character: his doggedness, his creativity, his fearlessness. But it was just one example of many. At the end of the film, Saul said, "History is not only behind us, we're making history every day." We have in this room a lot of people who've made a lot of history with Saul Landau, from his days as a student in Madison to the work he was doing up until the end of his life on Cuba and Syria. And I want to thank you all for being here to celebrate this extraordinary and history-making life. What we're going to do is go through some tributes by people who have requested to make them here, and if we have some time remaining, we'll also invite additional people to come up and make comments. And then we'll end with quite an extraordinary film, a tribute to Saul, by his longtime collaborator, the great cinematographer Haskell Wexler. And so I'd like to first call up to the stage John Cavanagh, our IPS director.
It's wonderful to see so many of you here tonight from so many different walks of Saul's life. And I want to thank especially his family for all that you've done over these last couple of years, these incredibly hard years. We're honored by your presence. And I want to thank people. There are people who've come here from as far away as Germany and Amsterdam and New Mexico and California and lots of other places to be with us here tonight. And also just to thank Sarah Anderson for absorbing so much of Saul's institutional knowledge on the fight and for shepherding us tonight. I had the supreme privilege of being a friend and colleague of Saul's for 30 years. He was 20 years older than I am, and so we would jog around the Wandelspark in Amsterdam at TNI meetings decades ago and up the hills in Santa Cruz 15 years ago, and I was always happy that he could get pleasure from being far more fit than I was. And it also made me very happy in the last few months that even as he was dying, that he had the time to sum up his life. I think a lot of people don't, but he did. And his deep love of his family, his accomplishments. And it was really good to hear him talk about his accomplishments from Cuba to Chile to Chiapas to Jamaica to Mexico to IPS. And I truly think that even in his cynicism, he understood and took comfort from the fact that he had made a mark on the history of the people that he cared so deeply about. Few can say that. And I want to share that Saul, as Sarah said, Saul really did want to be here tonight. His daughter, Valerie, who's here, kidded that we could rent an RV and drive Saul across the country. And then when we got serious about that, we just figured out a way to have him join by Skype. And his wonderful friend George Miller, Congressman Miller, was going to join him there. And he almost made it this far. He did tell me that he wanted tonight to be a celebration. We kind of talked this through, more than a memorial. He didn't quite understand what that word meant, so let's celebrate. Tonight you're going to hear, we'll all learn different parts of this amazing man. And I'm just going to take a moment to focus on one part, which is what Saul meant to IPS. And there's just two quick things I want to share here. First, Saul often liked to say, you probably all have heard this, that Congress needed a spinal transplant. And, well, he didn't succeed so well on that one, but he did give IPS a spinal transplant on a daily basis. And while that might have been painful at times for some of you and some of us, we're standing taller today because of it. And we at IPS knew, just as he had fought with every ounce of his strength for justice in the killings of Orlando and Ronnie, that he'd be there for us. And that we needed to be there for each other, whatever came our way. And secondly, the other thing I wanted to say is he constantly complained about what he called the left's reproduction problem. And that wasn't the beginning of a dirty joke. He meant that. And what he meant, he insisted that we find paths to bring in and mentor the next generation of what we at IPS call public scholars. And then he went out and built those paths. And we have him to thank for the 2 annual fellowships that IPS currently offers to help mentor young public scholars. And for me, every day now, I've really been feeling this last 2 weeks, I see a piece of Saul as I interact with Javier Rojo and Leslie Garvey, our current New Mexico and Newman Fellows. And former Newman Fellows, I mean, it was Farah Hassan who did the film as a former Newman Fellow, and Tope Falarin and others are here tonight. And in all of them, I see Saul. And I'll just say about, these fellowships, Saul was known for his strong principles, but I do want to say he could be flexible. And there was a wonderful moment for me when Saul was raising money for the IPS Newman Fellowship from a very special Santa Cruz couple, Ed and Carol Newman, that a number of you know. And Ed called me one day to say that he wanted to give that year's contribution towards endowing this fellowship by giving us his share in the Santa Cruz Golf Club. And he said it was currently worth about $130,000, which I was thinking golf share. I was thinking, oh, God, that's a crummy gift. And he said it was currently worth $130,000, but that if we waited a few months, it should go up to $140,000. So what did I think? Well, I thought I better ask Saul, who, because at the time he happened to be making his film, We Don't Play Golf Here, which was about the struggle in Mexico against corporate development, and in particular against a proposed golf course. So I called Saul and I asked him how he would feel about IPS owning a share in a golf club as his movie that tore apart golf clubs was coming out. And he said, "Are you kidding? Hold on to it as long as it takes to push up the value so we can have as many Newman Fellows as possible." So I mean, just in closing, what I miss most right now is Saul phoning in the evenings with a great idea on how to raise another $1,000, or who he just met that we should hire immediately. I would never tell him that we had a whole set of hiring, affirmative action hiring policies that have been put in place in the last 20 years. Or he'd talk about what his kids just accomplished, or why we weren't doing enough on the environment, or why we hadn't put his newest article up on the IPS website yet, or to tell me I should fire this or that person, or to propose a new board member. And it was always provocative, and it was always out of love and a desire to improve IPS and the larger human and planetary well-being. And I could never get him off the phone, nor did I ever want to. So thank you, Saul.
Hi, thank you for all of you for coming out here. It's amazing to see how many friends and people he influenced. And I'm Greg Landau, first son, and I realized that there was something different in our family when my first orientation about opening the door protocol was, if it's the police or the FBI, say my parents aren't here, and slam the door. I must have been about 5 years old, and trying to comprehend those instructions. And when I was a member of the Future Astronauts Club at Edison School in San Francisco, and where they were telling me about respect for authorities, etc., and trying to have my father explain to me, well, what is this about? And I began to understand what this was about as I grew up. And as his son, I worked with him on many of his films in Cuba, in Jamaica, and stood with him, and I realized that he was not just an armchair intellectual. So thank you all for honoring him, and we want to continue his work. We're proposing to start an online class to feature his films, his writings, interviews that he did, to keep the spirit alive and to keep his work going. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Valerie Landau. I'm Saul's daughter. Julia Landau is also here, who's his daughter. And of course, my other sisters, Marie and Carmen. My daughter, Molly McGee, is expecting a child, and Saul passed on this advice to her as a parent, and I thought that all of you might want to hear this advice that he gave my daughter, which was, he said, as a parent, the most important thing is to have confidence in your children and to really believe that their choices are the right choices. And second, to teach them that they should stand up to injustice, and also teach them to pick their battles wisely. So, thank you all for being here.
Wasn't sure if other Landau family members. Okay, Ariel, please. Ariel Dorfman.
Bueno, comienzo por hablar en castellano. I'll start by speaking Spanish because Saul certainly loved that language, and he loved Latin America, and he loved two countries in Latin America above all. I'll try to speak a bit about that. I think those of us who knew him well, and there may be others who didn't, have realized by now that he was not only a serious person in relation to the revolution, he was very funny. And I think the idea of celebrating him is very important, you know? I don't think he would want us to be crying. I think he'd want us to be fighting. He'd want us to be laughing. And he'd want us to be celebrating. So, turns out that my dear Angelica, my wife, and I, Angelica's here with me as always, have known Saul for over 43 years. He had the strange idea of going down to Chile to film, to do a film called ¿Qué hacer? What is to be done? Mocking Lenin in some sense and asking the question that Lenin had asked many, many years before. And it wasn't quite answered in the Russian Revolution, at least Gorbachev would say not. And I was called one day by Raul Ruiz, who was a friend of ours, a playwright then, and he had said he wasn't going to speak to me until I apologized for beating him at pool. And I was very bad at pool. I'm speaking about Raul Ruiz, not Saul. And yet he appeared one day and said, "You have to meet this gringo that I'm doing a film with." So we went over this enormous house on Avenida Lyon, and there was Saul Landau with Country Joe, who we had briefly met in California a year before. We're talking about 1970, the middle of the Allende campaign. And Saul was extraordinary. And I can remember he was so, what was extraordinary about him was, I told Angelica, I said, you know, this is one of the good gringos. And he's not making believe that he's a good gringo because he's a CIA guy who making believe he's a good gringo. He's a really good gringo. He's the sort, he said, you know, he's the new left and the old left combined, and that's pretty good. In the best qualities of both. But think about that, the best qualities of the new left and of the old left. He could very well have been one of those who had gone to Spain to fight in the Lincoln Brigades, and they would have felt very proud of him. But he would have been very, very, and he was, you know, part of the new left of the SDS group. I mean, and this was something that defined him. Now, I'm going to try not to, one thing about that film, by the way, was that, you know, it's about kidnapping somebody on the streets of Chile. And Saul was so sure of himself that he interviewed somebody in the film, a real person, who criticized the whole idea of the film, saying, Chileans would never do that. It would destroy our organization. It's against the idea we think about. We're against violence. A series of things like that. And Saul stuck it there in the middle of the film. And that, the Brechtian idea about that was very interesting. We didn't know, of course, that many years later, Saul would welcome Angelica and me and our children here in DC when we came and when IPS gave us refuge, which is something we'll never forget. when we were ourselves without a country and were wandering around the globe. What I'd like to say is that I'd like to sort of bring 3 or 4 little anecdotes before reading a poem that bring Saul to life. Because if Chile was one of his great love affairs, Cuba, of course, was the other one. And of course, there's been some justice in Chile, but there has been no justice for Cuba in this country, certainly, that continues to blockade it continually and harass it. And I can remember one night, I think it was Barbara Ehrenreich's house, and Angelica and I were there, and Saul had a conversation which must have lasted 4 hours with Christopher Hitchens. Oh no, Christopher Hitchens was then extremely progressive, but he had a position in relation to Cuba which was very critical, and Saul would not having anything of it. And they went at each other in a very scholarly, I mean, that was, they were both incredibly witty, caustic people. And they wrote nonstop. Saul didn't correct most of his stuff. Christopher Hitchens would sit down and write, and it would just come out like that. He would never correct his stuff. I revised my stuff over and over again, trying to get it right. And they went at each other. It was extraordinary just to sit there, listening to them. It was like listening to lessons in history about what was going to happen to the left. Let me go to, there's so many other things. It's about brunch at the Schneider's house and moments when we would see his films almost clandestinely in their basement. And then there was a day, Saul didn't speak very much about his own personal pain, ever. One day we were at TNI, one of these celebrations of TNI that John Cavanagh just spoke about. And it wasn't in Fondle Park, but Saul and Angelica and I had dinner, and he opened up to us about his own personal pains and his own frustrations and all things. That was very strange. He never told people if he was sad. He never let on that could be problems, but he was human. He just was always there for everybody else, so he didn't want anybody to feel that they needed to sympathize with him. He never wanted to show that he was so tender. I guess that's it. Let me give you one more little anecdote before reading this poem that I sent him when I heard where he was, how he was about to go into the afterlife that neither he nor I believe in, except in as much as he's here, right? And that's that one day he came to visit us in Durham. He went to Fred Jameson's house, and then he came to visit us. And we asked for some pizza. And I remember that they brought the pizza, and something was missing from the pizza, in the sense, like, let's say we had asked for this sort of topping, and they brought another sort of topping. So I went and I said, Saul, I'm sending this back. And he said, why? Why are you going to send it back? I said, because, listen, because capitalism stinks. But it allows us to send back the goddamn pizza if they got it wrong. And he said, you're keeping the system going because you believe that it makes a difference. And I said, it makes a difference because I would rather have bell peppers and salami on my pizza. And he said, you're caught by these people, Ariel, don't you realize? I said, no, I'm not caught by them. I said, and we went on like this for a while, and then I said, what the hell? I'll go and take the pizza back. But what I'm trying to say is, this was Saul, right? He would argue every point to the death. He would not let you be right. And he said, you know what? Do what you want, Ariel. So I want to end up reading these poems. They weren't written for him, but they were in some sense. And I want to, they were written for a PEN International campaign that we organized last year for murdered journalists in Latin America who are murdered at a higher rate than any other place in the world, especially in Mexico. And I want to read them in both languages because I think it's worth doing that for Saul. He loved words. I don't know how many of you were on his email list, but every week I would expect his latest, right? And if I didn't answer, he would say, did you get it? Right? I said, yes, I got it. I loved it. It's terrific, Or even if it wasn't terrific, So it's called Despedida y Amanecer is this poem, and it's spelled also farewell and dawn. I'm going to read it first in Spanish because that way you get a sense of the flavor of the language, and then you get a sense of the words for those who do not know Spanish and should learn, right? Right, Saul? Aunque sea la última palabra que escriba mi amor, aunque sea la última palabra, aunque sea la última, mi amor, la última mía, la última tuya, la última que leas, la última verdad, que sea y que leas, la última que viva, la última que escriba, la última que viva y respire y escriba. No voy a cejar, mi amor, no vamos a dejar que venza la insanta muerte y la feroz resaca de la maldad. Esta es mi casa, tu santa tierra, la única que nos queda como defensa, mi palabra como única ofensa contra la guerra. Aunque sea la última que escriba, mi amor, la última palabra que sea, por pequeña que se vea, por lejana que se lea, contra la insanta muerte insana, solo queda esta verdad. Como única defensa de tu pobre tierra humana, esta palabra, aunque sea la última palabra, aunque sea la última que escriba, mi amor, mi país, mi comarca, mi familia, mi comuna, aunque sea la última aventura, aunque sea la última, mi amor, aunque sea la última ventana en nuestra casa que se quema. And in English, it's farewell and dawn. Though it be the last word, I write my love. Though it be the last of them all. Though it be my last word, my love, your last word, the last word of mine you read, my love. The last breath you heard that I live and breathe, I will not seize, my love. We will not allow unsaintly death to increase its malignant undertow. This is my house, your sainted land, our line of last and sweet defense. My word is the closing quiet blow against war's outraging violence. Though it be the last, I write my love. The last word I breathe, however small, however distant what you read, whispering against death, unsaintly and insane. Only truth, this truth so marginal, my defiant and final defense of our earth as it turns, this word, though it be the last. Though it be the last word I ever write, my love, my bread, my body, my family, my land. Though it be my last birth, though it be the last, my love, though it be the last window of our house as it burns. Gracias, Sol, y hasta la victoria siempre.
Good evening, everyone. I have the honor of reading a letter to Saul by Geraldo Hernandez, one of the Cuban Five. My name is Netfa Freeman. I've been at IPS since 1999, the end of 1999, and met Saul maybe around those few years. We share an affinity for changing U.S. policy toward Cuba, but I didn't really get a chance to work with Saul until the latter years of his life, right around when he finished Will the Real Terrorists Please Stand Up. I'm the events coordinator at IPS, so that was an honor to help screen his films in Washington, D.C., and help promote them in other places around the world. And it really, the Real Terrorists Please Stand Up, as people may know, deals with not only U.S. policy toward Cuba and the most obscene part of it, but also the case of the Cuban Five heroes who've been who were sent here to try to thwart this type of activity, but instead were jailed by the United States government. And so in the last years of Saul's life, he dedicated his life to trying to expose that case, that issue. And as a result, he became very close to Geraldo Hernandez, one of the Cuban Five that's incarcerated in California. And I want to read this letter. I think not only does it poetically capture how many of us feel about Saul, but also what is true. Geraldo Hernandez sends a heartfelt letter to Saul Landau. It is not true, Saul. Do not repeat it. I know others are also saying it, but it is not true. There is a pain in the voice of Carmen when she answers my call, but it cannot be true. You may say that, yes, old friends have called you, and others have come from afar to see you, and the tributes have already begun. Even your own body loudly says it is true, but that does not matter. I know that it is not true. How could it be true with so many people who admire you and love you? Adriana, whenever we talk, asks me to call you again. And if that does not mean much to you, it is because you do not know how she defends and fights for each and every minute of my phone time. Everyone asks for you, Saul, from all around the world. And like me, they all know that it is just a journey, that the other is not true. A trip where? I do not know with certainty. It is like a close play in a baseball game where no one can agree on the outcome. It is a journey that many do not return, but you're one of the privileged ones. You'll be here whenever Danny visits me and in Cuba when the five are reunited. You will return whenever someone reads one of your books or sees one of your documentaries. How could you not be there when someone asked who filmed those images of Fidel pushing the Jeep stuck in the mud on that road? Or so many other images that you captured while traveling half of Cuba with him in 1968. Do you think that you will not be there when someone sees Will the Real Terrorist Please Stand Up and will get to understand the case of the five? Don't even mention that, my friend. You will always be there when people see the interview with Salvador Allende, perhaps the only one, at least the most important, written in English, as well as when someone discovers those still unpublished images of Fidel talking at home with Harry Belafonte. It is just a journey, Saul. The other is not true. You'll come when someone wants to know everything about the bomb that killed Letelier and Moffett in the heart of Washington, D.C., when someone wants to understand Chiapas or the Maquiladoras. When they read your poem, your always accurate articles. When people mention your Medal of Friendship of Cuba or Bernardo O'Higgins of Chile, your Emmy, and so many other awards and decorations. You will come whenever I tell someone that I had the privilege to meet you, learn from you, enjoy your sense of humor, and when they ask me to whom I owe my brotherhood with Danny Glover. You'll always be with your family, with your friends, and with your students. Of course it is not true, Saul. I do not know that it is only a journey. I know that it is only a journey. What I don't know is if we will be able to communicate. So I don't want to wait for your departure to tell you, thank you for your everything, my brother. It is an honor to share with you. On behalf of the five, our families, and so many good Cubans, thank you. I will not deny that we are sad, but at the same time, we are happy to know that in your case, when it happens, it will only be a trip because you knew how to earn that privilege. Very soon, I'll be calling you again, but do not repeat it because it is not true, Saul. It is not true that you are going to die. Gerardo Hernandez Nordello, United States Penitentiary, Victorville, California, August 10th, 2013.
Hi, everybody. I'm John Alpert. I'm a friend of Saul's and a fellow filmmaker. And Saul came to me wanting me to help him make his last film about the struggle for gay rights in Cuba. And I wanted to impress Saul, so I gave him a copy of a documentary I had made about Fidel, and he reached into his bag and he pulled out his that he had made 10 years earlier and was much better than mine. I was working on a film in Juarez about the violence there, and I gave that to him, and he reached into his bag and he pulled out the film that he had made in Juarez 5 years before mine that was much better than mine. Likewise, film in Chiapas. I mean, I could go on and on. Every film that I made, Saul made 5 or 10 years earlier, and he made it better. And everybody knows that Saul was attracted to the progressive things that were going on in Cuba. Made a lot of films about them, but he also said, they got some things wrong. In the beginning of the Cuban Revolution, they were extremely homophobic. They rounded up all the gay men and they put them in concentration camps. And over the next decades, there was extraordinary prejudice against gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender Cubans. Saul knew this was wrong. And a few years ago, Mariela Castro also heard all these stories, knew about the suffering. She decided she was going to do something to change it, and Saul decided he was going to make a movie about it. Saul believed that prejudice and ignorance divides us, and if he can erase those barriers, we could all work together to make the world a better place. So we went down to Cuba to make this film, And Saul, even on his deathbed, was calling me every night with new suggestions. Let's change this part, let's change the music. You need to go back down to Cuba, you missed these parts. And IPS and I promised Saul that we would finish this film. It's not going to be as good as if Saul made it, but we're going to try as best we can. I want to thank everybody who supported the film so far. We've handed out descriptions of the film. I have DVDs if you'd like. Saul would want me to share them with you. But here's a sample of the film. And Saul, I'll do my best, and I'll listen to everything you're telling me. So here's a sample from the film.
Todos tienen recuerdos lindos y estudian sin preocupaciones. En cambio, cuando yo tenía su edad, para mí fue diferente. Muy diferente. 9 horas, 10 horas de entrenamientos diarios. Pero a alguien se le ocurrió que no era como las otras chicas. Yo no me pintaba, no tenía uñas largas, no tenía novio. No me interesaban los chicos, no iba a fiestas, solo tenis, tenis, tenis. Y entonces, Maya es lesbiana. Por tanto, no puede ser tenista. Cuando rompo con el equipo, me arrancaron mi corazón. El sufrimiento fue muy grande, rompieron mi vida, pararon mi corazón.
Hola, soy Mariela Castro, soy la directora del Centro Nacional de Educación Sexual, que es este centro. No soy homosexual, ni tampoco soy transgender, pero soy solidaria con todas las personas que necesitan desde un apoyo institucional ocuparse de la promoción y defensa de sus derechos. Tú sabes, Juanito, que mi trabajo hay muchas personas que lo apoyan y que ayudan, pero también hay muchas personas que no están de acuerdo con lo que nosotros hacemos y por suerte nos lo dicen, porque eso es importante saberlo.
Mucho gusto, Luis Amores Pascual.
Encantada, Mariela Castro.
Respeto a los homosexuales, pero es la promoción que se le está dando tan grande, de proliferar eso así, que se puedan casar, que puedan adoptar niños, puede acarrear para nuestra sociedad un prejuicio. Por donde quiera, usted transita por las calles por la noche, va por aquí, por Infanta, por Carlos III, por la Navidad. Es un mar de transexuales. Oye, no se puede caminar.
No es promocionar la homosexualidad. Yo promuevo que todos tengamos la libertad de ser como somos y que todos por igual acatemos las mismas reglas, pero también las mismas oportunidades. Realmente, ahora escuchándolos a ellos, me di cuenta de que mi papá tiene razón. Muchas personas no están de acuerdo con el matrimonio, pero yo creo que hay que generar más debate sobre este tema, porque si debatimos, la población puede cambiar también esos puntos de vista.
Tengo un hermano mío que cuando era chiquito me quemó los pantalones míos. Que lo que yo tenía me los quemó, porque dice que no podía tener más pantalones. En la escuela tuve que llegar a 6º grado porque no me permitían ir en pantalones. La mentalidad de las personas están cambiando constantemente. Mira, aquí hay un gay, Danilo, él es jefe del almacén de productos terminados.
Yo puedo gritar que soy homosexual y no sucede nada, al contrario. Y las personas cuando yo grito eso me respetan. Y eso es gracias a Mariela Castro nomás, a nadie más. Mira, ahí está la bandera cubana. Me satisface hondamente sentirme más cubano. Gracias, de verdad.
Este trabajo que nosotros hacemos me hace recordar a John Lennon cuando cantaba All you need is love, dan da dan dan, all you need is love, dan da dan dan, all you need is love, yeah, all you need it. ¿Y por qué? Porque es un mensaje de paz permanente, es un mensaje de amor, de inclusión, de convivencia respetuosa entre las personas y lo llevo en el corazón. All you need is love. Bam, 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 bam. All you need is love. Bam, bam, bam. Todo lo que quiero es amor, es amor. Todo lo que quiero es amor, es amor. Todo lo que quiero es amor, es amor.
There is no greater defender of the Cuban Revolution than Saul Landau, and you can see how fierce his thirst for justice was that he could make a film like that at the same time and do it with a sense of humor. I've been reading all of the different obits that John's been sending out about Saul, this incredible, great life, the books, the films, the poet, the writer, the professor, the journalist, the investigator, the playwright, a radio talk show host, fellow at IPS, a father, a grandfather, Chiapas, Chile, Cuba. It's a huge life. He lived big. But they all missed the sort of essence of Saul that all of us kind of feel. One is his remarkable gift for friendship. Ariel said Saul didn't open himself up. I actually disagree with that. My sense of Saul was that he kind of embraced you when you met him. He was fierce. He was a little awesome. He was certainly argumentative. But he brought you into his life, and he opened up and quizzed you about yours, and he made friends. And once you were a friend, you always knew he had your back, and he would be there. Saul was very canny. It's worth knowing that. You know, he's a great filmmaker. I think some of his films and the way he did internal discussions in the films were quite path-breaking. And, you know, Paul Jacobs and the Nuclear Gang got all the awards, but Who Shot Alexander Hamilton was one of the great films about Congress ever made. And as I remember it, it was made in part on a shoestring with no money, as Saul was using it to seduce Rebecca and get her engaged in the enterprise. Saul, as we know from the Letelier thing, had persistence and fierce loyalty. You know, we have sort of, by memorializing the Letelier-Moffat memorial, et cetera, we've made it sort of an institution. At the time, it was a rupture. There was nothing like that happened. There was nothing like that happened in the United States. We were utterly innocent and shocked. IPS split apart over it in the aftermath. And Saul took it personally. I remember the night of the assassination, we went out to the Letelier house, and he was already there. He was already there with the FBI agents. They assumed that this was a gang of leftists, and this was either a leftist dispute or that Orlando was having an affair and Isabel blew him up. I'm serious about that. That was the initial theory. And Carner Cornick and the FBI agents saw us as you know, slightly left and over the moon. And in this process, Saul, because he was such a mensch, turned them from adversaries to allies to personal friends to advocates for justice. He had an amazing effect. Two things before I go. We've got to tell Saul Landau jokes here. Saul was like a compendium, a Bartlett's compendium of Jewish humor. So, you know, tell Saul Landau, listen, I'm going to the gym more, I'm getting in shape, I'm feeling much better, and Saul would tell the joke about the guy who goes to the Jewish doctor, right? And the doctor pounds on his chest and squeezes his balls and sticks his finger up his ass, and Saul would use all that language. And so Doc, the patient said, will I live to be 80? And the doctor said, well, I don't know. Are you still drinking and smoking and whoring around? No, no, Doc, I don't do any of those things. Well, then why do you want to live to be 80? When Saul came into the room with that smirk on his face, you always knew something was going to happen. You didn't know what it was, but you know it was something. You know, Saul was fiercely loyal to IPS as an institution, an incredible contributor to it, but he relentlessly fought against building any institutional function at the Institute for Policy Studies. He was an anarchist. He may have been a Marxist in training. He was an anarchist in spirit and in practice. In the last days, when I talked to Saul, actually, I think it was when he was in Washington the last time, and we were talking about what's going on with him, and he quoted Woody Allen. He said, Woody Allen famously said, I don't mind dying, I just don't want to be there when it happens. And in a way that sums up what I feel, which is Saul is so alive in my heart and my memories that I'm pretty certain he wasn't there when it happened. Thanks.
I was just helped up the stairs for effect. I'm going to speak a little bit differently about Saul. And believe it or not, I'm going to talk about first Thomas Jefferson. So all of you who know things about Thomas Jefferson, go back home and look at your Google and see how wrong or right I was. Jefferson, of course, came from Virginia planters. And he was rich. His family was rich. And they were slaveholders. And by the same token, he was terrific at writing. And he had the power of the pen, and he wrote the Declaration of Independence and wrote in to the Declaration words like "we the people" were in the Constitution. Now, what was the whole business about "we the people"? What was all that about? And that, of course, was who were the people? How did you get to be a person in this society? Well, goddamn, you had to struggle to be a person. Because at that point, it was property owners who were the people who held the property. It's people who were slaveholders who held slaves. It's women who, of course, did not exist in any sort of way that you could see them, unless they lived from Massachusetts, and then they got kind of equal billing sometime. So that was where the country came from. That was a piece of who we were. Now, let's move forward out of the 19th and 18th century, and let's move into our time and Saul's time. As you know, Saul died at 77, and this came as a great shock to all of us. The reason it was a great shock was that you knew he was directing the film of his death. Every step of the way, he was telling you what to say, what to think, what to look at, what to read, both from his own work and from other people's work. And as you heard, he would get angry if you did not respond to Progresso, where he had articles every week, or whatever the particular thing was. So along with his great and enormous gifts of scholarship and filmmaking and teaching, he was a great teacher as well as a loving father, as we heard today. Saul did something else. He did good deeds. Jews would call it a mitzvah. And he was a good Jew. And he was a New York Jew who was transplanted to California. When we were young, most students and scholars concentrated on what was defined as the world of the West or of the East. Their learning mostly extended only to European civilization, but mostly it was France and Germany and Italy. Rare was the person who was taught to expand her or his knowledge beyond those shores. In the United States, the minor races, as a former president, Herbert Hoover, described them, were slaves of whites. And they were, in his mind, minor races. They toiled in the fields or copper mines, those fortunate enough to be considered house Negroes still subject to the predations of their white masters, who took for granted their right of rape and the galling crime of incest. Sally Hemings did exist. She was indeed the mistress of Thomas Jefferson for years, and they had children together. And yet, everyone bows down and forgets all of this as we bow down to the learning and statues and monuments of Jefferson. Now comes Saul Landau, who was our explorer and guide to territories and people unknown to us. He said to me, remember, there are people down under in the South, in Latin America. They have their own culture, their own music. And they had, as well as the music, their own way of speaking. They fought in North America's wars, especially those of the United States, but they had their own dreams, whether they were Puerto Rican or Cuban. And they had their own heroes, whether it was Fidel or Marty. Saul said to the world that he would film this world and make it come alive to show people who were black Cubans or white Cubans. He would film gay Cubans and project their struggles. But perhaps most of all, he said, don't be afraid. Use your life to bring about liberation and dignity for all people. Be not afraid was his subtext. And so I still hear his voice at night, hectoring and knowing one must smile at that as he directed his own death, saying, now it is time for others to carry through the liberation and affirmation of life's struggle.
Did you hear that? Thank you, Marcus. I'm Cora Weiss. I will. Okay. They're teaching me how to speak. Rebecca, Greg, Valerie, Beryl, Mario, and if there are family members I've missed, Julia, thank you. Thank you for sharing Saul. It was 1953. I met Saul in the Rathskeller at the University of Wisconsin. He was pushing bratwursts and burgers. We had beer together. I once drove him to a house with the shades drawn. No questions asked. Maybe those of you who are not present but are listening might know what that was all about. Leroy Gore, the editor of the Sauk City newspaper, started a petition campaign to recall Senator Joe. You're listening. Saul and I collected signatures, which judges threw out on the grounds of illegibility. Saul and Nina were at Peter and my wedding in 1956. And this past April or May, on Saul's last trip to New York City, he taught me to text. Saul is family.
I am Peter Weiss, another member of the Weiss family. I miss the conversations that I had with Saul, where we exchanged our mutual outrages that fueled each other. I also miss the ones where we occasionally disagreed about something, as a result of which one or the other might have changed his or her. No, just his, right? I know you're always supposed to say his or her. As a result of which one of us might have changed our opinion ever so little. In the obit about Alice Munro getting the Obel, there was this quote from her: "The complexity of things, things within things within things, it's endless." Saul knew about that. And he knew that when you research something, you had to find out about things within things within things. And he did that to perfection. And then Alice Munro goes on and says, nothing is easy, nothing is simple. Saul would have disagreed with that. When he finished finding out about things within things within things, he knew exactly who the bad guys were and who the good guys were. She's also quoted as saying, I did what I wanted to do, and it makes me fairly satisfied. I don't think Saul was really satisfied, although he certainly did what he had to do. But as I said in a message to him, the idea that you could have done more was just pure, refined bullshit. Nobody that I ever came across did more for a better world than Saul.
And I'm Danny Weiss, related to Cora and Peter Weiss. And I just wanted to acknowledge my friend and colleague, John Lawrence, who's in the back there, who I know has been was a friend of Saul's for probably 4 decades or more. It's good to see you, John. So, like each of you, I really miss Saul. I think we probably all feel that. He was one of a kind. Saul was a teacher at heart, and he taught me a lot, like he taught so many of us. Thanks to my mother, I knew him from the time when I was a kid. Saul was ageless, and Saul's interests were limitless. He was a good teenage guidance counselor for me. He was a hit with my college friends. And he was a calming voice when I was a young father. He taught me to get the facts and press the argument. And he taught me never to have a hot light in a scene that you were filming. But he also taught me that it was okay to like professional football even if you were a progressive. So he would sneak off to a 49ers game from time to time. Saul believed there was a right way to make really good salad dressing. He, of course, believed there was a right way to do basically everything. Make the dressing in the salad bowl first. Garlic and really good olive oil are staple ingredients. Saul liked to talk on the phone. I think you've heard a few other people refer to these phone conversations. He liked to talk a lot, at length. And there was no such thing as a short conversation. After he moved to Alameda, he started calling me regularly during the day while I was working. And during the last 2 years, the calls became more frequent. Each call was divided into 3 sections. The first, complaining about politics. Why don't the Democrats do this? Why doesn't Obama do that? Don't we know how stupid that is? Could I ask the Bureau of Prisons to please release the Cuban Five? Don't we know that arming the Syrian rebels is going to bite us in the ass? The second part, Jewish jokes. I think we've heard other people refer to that. The dreadful state of affairs could always be summed up by 1 or 3 good Jewish jokes. One of my real regrets is that I don't remember all of his Jewish jokes. There's a book for that, though. And the third part was personal. How was my family? How was Ann and the girls? How were my parents? How were my sisters? And I would ask him how he was, and after he got sick, he would describe the cancer and the excruciating treatments. But then he would tell me what each of his kids was up to and how proud he was of each of them. Saul loved his children and his grandchildren very much. Saul was probably right about things more often than he was wrong, and he was often right before everyone else was ready to hear what he had to say. The phone rings less often now. I miss those calls.
everyone. I'm Farah Hassan. And by divine intervention, Saul entered my life 12 years ago, and he taught me how to write, film, and live with dignity. I can still hear his voice in my head right now telling me, no jump cuts, don't be boring, do not use the passive voice. We instantly bonded over having fathers from the old country. His father from Ukraine, my father from Syria, and we were both Semites with prominent noses. Not big, prominent. We communicated by exchanging stories and news articles, watching and dissecting films. The Coen brothers, always a favorite. We tested one another's tolerance for salacious humor. His was particularly impressive, as I think all of you know. I'd like to think I'm getting there, and it is my life's goal to be as dirty as Saul. I'm also a first-year law student. We'll see how that pans out. Regardless of the time of day or the time zone, he delivered his pearls of wisdom in pairs. Don't be a victim, followed by, unless you believe in reincarnation, you only have one shot at life. So quit whining, get to work. Even at bleak moments, unrelenting wit always prevailed. I remember once I asked him about filming something on the streets in DC, and he said, if you ask the rabbi, nothing's kosher. Translation, don't ask. Again, let's see how far I can get away with that in law school. I met Saul at the start of my sophomore year at the California State Polytechnic University in Pomona, California, and he taught courses on Latin America, history, and digital media, and I was 19 years old at the time, wide-eyed and curious, and I walked into his office in August 2001, and the next 3 years, it became my intellectual equivalent of Andy Warhol's factory, without the Velvet Underground and the drugs and the hangers-on and the troubled pseudo-starlets, but where film scripts and detective novels and muckraking commentaries percolated at a fiendish pace. And I remember during my research assistant job interview, he asked the following question. So, are you interested in making movies and learning how to play a part in your history? Sure, I replied, captivated by both his lofty proposition and his eyes that narrated more riveting stories than Shahrazad, radiating whimsy, strength, unabashed soul. Watch these films that I made with Castro and Allende, read some of my books. If you're interested in working with me after that, let me know next week. And that began my political education outside the stifling halls of academia, thanks to the ever-generous, ever-humble Saul. My first day of work, I prepared to bombard him with questions about Cuba, given his history of making 6 films there. But on this particular day, 9/11, Cuba took a backseat to the acts of terrorism against the US, and no sooner had Saul arrived to work than we had to leave because it was a state university and it closed early in the aftermath of the events. But nonetheless, despite that truncated workday, he still managed to instill the most valuable lesson of my life in a parking lot, no less. And as the hours passed and it became clear that Muslims, Arabs, South Asians, those who looked suspicious would face backlash for no other reason than their identity, he uttered these immortal words as I entered the car. Do not be afraid. You have a duty to speak out. He knew I was an Arab and a Muslim, but for him, righting wrongs, regardless of where they occurred, always trumped narrow identity politics. And that makes sense when you think about it, because how else would a boy from the Bronx go on to make documentaries exposing double standards on terrorism, torture, militarism, and the consequences of neoliberalism in Cuba, Brazil, Iraq, and Mexico, respectively. And it didn't matter that I had never written anything before or that I feared public speaking. At that moment, my guayabera-wearing Socrates, whose probing questions always revealed higher truths about power and injustice, empowered me to play a role, however modest, in my own history. Thank you. On the 12th anniversary of 9/11 and in the midst of President Obama's pushback on bombing Syria, I miss my mentor and my friend more than ever, his shrewd analysis, his penetrating wit. And after learning of his passing, I walked around the humid streets of DC, and where he called home for 20 years. And that night in particular, I could barely make out the stars. So instead I turned to the streetlights, and in them I saw that perpetual gleam in his eyes, illuminating the far corners of the earth, however imperfect, disheveled, disillusioned. In the morning, even the birds chirped in my ears, reminding me just how privileged I was to work with and learn from the best. Through him, he pointed me to IPS, where I worked on Syria and Iran with Phyllis, and in particular, I tried, and I still try, to infuse film with politicking, just like my mentor. I also traveled to Syria for the first time with my Socrates just after the 2003 invasion of Iraq. We made a film there, and I was allowed to both discover my roots and learn about filmmaking. So you see, all roads not only lead to Damascus, but to Saul. In times of need, the living need a poem, he once wrote. I call mine Saul Landau. Thank you.
My name's Philip Brenner. I want to start by thanking Sarah Anderson and John Cavanagh. This is a labor of love, and turn to the people next to you, turn to the people around you, just hug someone. Look what they have brought us to. Thank you. You made this happen, and Saul, of course, made this happen, but it's all of us. I mean, we are family. You know, when I asked Saul about this event, he had some sarcastic things to say about it, mainly put down self-deprecations, and then he said, well, okay. You know that this event should not be about him. It should be actually about us. And we should ask ourselves, what did we learn from being with Saul Landau? What lessons do we take away from that? And then, of course, he offered advice. He said, don't waste this moment on Drek. So I thought, what was it like? My wife Betsy said, think about what it was like to be with Saul. And the first thing that came to mind was that he was a nudge. The phone, you've heard, the phone would ring at 9 in the morning, especially when he moved to California. And Saul had asked if I had written the letter that the previous night I had promised to write to some government official. Had I arranged the meeting that he wanted? Had I written the article that I was writing? Had I finished it? So I thought about this. I said, the lesson is be a nudge like Saul. No, that was not the lesson I wanted in part. But the phone calls, the phone calls were something, they're another matter. Saul made the time to call his friends. They weren't just about nudging. Sandy Levinson
is the director of the Center for Cuban Studies, and Saul has been on the board since the founding more than 40 years ago as part of his devotion to both Sandy and to Cuba. And Sandy, I think, characterized this best when she said that Saul had his priorities right. That Saul was, as you heard from Ariel, he was not a perfectionist about his writing. And as a result, there were mistakes in what he wrote. Saul took no time to promote himself or his films, and as a consequence, fewer people knew how great he was or how important his ideas were. He certainly wasn't a fashion monger and not much of a consumer, but he did have the time. He used his time to talk to his friends. And sometimes those calls were nothing more than like a Seinfeld episode. They were about nothing. Except they were about being human, being in touch with someone. And most often he talked about his children. I suspect that they don't know the depth of love and respect he had for them, because he tended not to lavish praise on people. They probably don't know that he dismissed any suggestion that he deserved some small credit for the talent that they displayed, their achievements, but yet in each of them there is some of his talent. Greg is a magical musician and a composer, a producer, a teacher who links artists and rhythms of diverse cultures in the hemisphere. Valerie is a self-taught filmmaker and computer programmer, as a teacher and educational designer committed to enhancing creativity in learning. Carmen, as a medical doctor and director of a women's health clinic, who taught herself Spanish so that she could earn her medical degree in Cuba. Julia, as an actress and investigative journalist, who recently obtained degrees in public health and communication so that she could write effectively about health and poverty. And Marie, as an editor with a university press, whose sharp prose and piercing observations have already made her a writer of distinction. If there was one person who was Saul's Saul, that's to say someone who, as Mark would say, ideas reverberated continually in his head, it was probably Paul Jacobs. Towards the end of Paul Jacobs and the Nuclear Gang, as Paul Jacobs himself is dying of cancer and is shriveled, Saul interviews him and asks Paul, why have you continued to pursue your fight against nuclear weapons? Why have you pursued your mission to reveal the dangers of nuclear power, despite the fact that you're sick and dying from cancer? And I believe Paul's answer is also what kept Saul going. Paul said, there's a saying in the Talmud, and I'm not sure Paul ever read the Talmud, but he said, there's a saying in the Talmud, let's hope there is, that it is not incumbent on thee to complete the task, but neither art thou free to desist from thy part in it. Paul added, I take that to mean that it's my job to do my piece of it. Maybe it's a little piece, maybe it's a big piece. Somehow you have to do your piece of it. So Paul's admonition helped me understand why Saul was so intent on having Stark published. Amazon published it in August, and then why he kept asking about how well it was selling. Stark is Saul's most recent book. It's a mystery novel. It's his first novel. Saul might have graded this as a mystery novel B-. Well, he would have said B minus. The main character is a Jewish private detective whose livelihood largely consists of photographing men in compromising positions as they cheat on their wives. He's a schlemazel. So remember the difference between a meal is someone who spills the soup at the table, and the schlemazel is the one who gets the soup spilled on him. So this is a schlemazel of a private detective. But in Stark, when the occasion arises for this schlemazel, Stark, to act courageously and to do the right thing about a terrible crime, he rises to the occasion. So the message of the book seems now to be clear. Even a schlemazel can summon up courage, and if a schlemazel can do this, what's your excuse? I think Saul died in peace, knowing that he had done his part, and that there would be others who would carry on. That is, we, his family, his friends, his comrades, and his students. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Julia. Yeah, I wasn't going to say anything, but actually Johnny Alpert's speech got me a little excited, riled up. Because when I was working on Will the Real Terrorists Please Stand Up with Dad, he kept saying this refrain. It was the hardest film he ever worked on because the narrative was all non-linear and there was so much information to be packed in. He just said, this is it. This is my last film. This is going to be it. I'm not making another film after this. Every time, Dad, please, you know that's not true. You're going to make, and of course, after the film was finished, within 3 months, he was working on the next film with Johnny. And actually, it's interesting because I think Mariela Castro was sort of the last important friendship of Saul's life. I had the honor of attending a cocktail party for her in San Francisco with many of the gay bourgeoisie, UCSF psychiatrists and transgender therapists and Planned Parenthood activists and everything. And Saul was there, and I took video of it. I'll post it later so you could see it. But he was really not in what you would call his element. And it was cool to see him not in his element because he was literally dwarfed by many transgender professionals around him. And you know, he sat with Mariela and he was talking with her, and then, you know, someone would sidle up, so what do you do? And, you know, so they don't know who he is. He's not Saul Landau, filmmaker, you know. Oh, well, I make films, yeah. Oh, that's very interesting. So, and then a surprise visitor came. Mariela's friends had prepared for this dancer. It was the middle of the day in San Francisco, an apartment, and dancer comes in, you know, transvestite dancer, stripping down, the music starts, stripping down, bra, underwear, very small apartment, mind you. Just a few people gathered around, and Saul's just there in the front row, kind of wondering what to do with his hands, you know. And so, you know, she's like, you know, doing her thing and really shaking it in front of everybody, and he just was kind of like joining it. But he was never, you know, he was just into it. It was just cool to see him amongst these people that were not really, up until that point, his people, and I think they kind of became his people there at the end. And so that was cool. So I just felt the desire to share that story. And I can't wait till the film gets done. So Julia Zweig is gonna come up now, and I really appreciate that she's talking, because I think of a lot of the people that Saul knew. She really understands his ideas the best, and he always enjoyed conversing with her. He said that she didn't repeat herself the way that a lot of people did. She stops talking when she's made her point. That was something that he really appreciated about her. Yeah. So thanks for coming.
What a privilege to follow Julia Landau. And I'll try to stop talking once I've made my point. That is a high compliment, as all of you know, coming from Saul. I think the purest, happiest period in my education followed the moment when Saul and Rebecca and Carmen and Julia moved to Santa Cruz, California in the spring of 1982. Saul taught a seminar. The title was Revolution and Counter-Revolution in Latin America, and the 1980s was a very big decade for both. But the seminar should have been called How to Think, or How to Think About Power, Money, Work, History, Writing, Loyalty, Friendship, and the Pleasures of Fried Rice. I'll come back to recipes. Saul's classes at Santa Cruz were electric, and on the first day, in a class about Latin America, he commanded us all to go to the library, no Google then, and to read Federalist Paper number 10, which I commend you to all read, not commend, tonight, by James Madison, which is about the politics of factions and the need to extend the sphere. And that's an essential document to understand American foreign policy since his time. Anyway, Saul was trained as a historian and sociologist by the likes of William Appleman Williams and C. Wright Mills. He gravitated to their emphasis on world historical trends, on the global clash of ideas during the Cold War, on power and powerlessness, on the financial and economic underpinnings of American history and foreign policy. But of course, Saul's films were character-driven. They focus on people, on specific people. And writing a biography myself right now, I've been reading about how to try to get a handle on portraying people against the backdrop of their history. And the American historian David McCullough's essay about the naturalist and, like Saul, an explorer before Saul's time of the Americas, Alexander von Humboldt, reminded me that whatever those large social forces, we're shaped by the specific people that we're fortunate enough to know, and that's what we've been talking about tonight. Of course, Humboldt traveled throughout the Americas in the 18th and well into the 19th century. He even spent some time in Cuba, where one of the most notorious massacres of the Batista secret police took place in 1957 on a street named for Humboldt, where one of our best friends in Cuba, Soraya Castro, lives on that street. So history brings us all together. History, writes McCullough, is a spacious realm. There should be no walls. What history is chiefly about is life. Think of this man. And while there are indeed great unfathomable forces in history before which even the most exceptional of individuals seem insignificant, the wonder is how often events turn on a single personality or the quality called character. Later in Humboldt's life, an admirer of his, the naturalist Louis Agassiz, sought him in Paris and described his life-changing experience with Humboldt. And I'm going to come back to that seminar in Santa Cruz in a minute, but Agassiz wrote in the 19th century, "How he examined me and how much I learned in that short time, how to work, what to do and what to avoid, how to live, how to distribute my time, what methods of study to pursue." Since Saul died last month, I've been in touch with many who could have written exactly that sentence about their experience with Saul, who basked in and benefited from the quality of his character. And today, from that first Santa Cruz seminar, or after training with him at IPS or later, there are historians, authors, filmmakers, artists, activists, community leaders, political strategists, environmentalists. They are mothers, fathers, and parents. And here was something amazing that we all realized. Saul was 47 years old when we first met him, a younger man than we are now. That's an incredible thought. So, a few gifts from Saul, which are, of course, how many people in the room did he say, get up before 5 in the morning and start writing? Raise your hands. Exactly, that one. So I thank him for that. Cuba, 30 years ago, he sent me there, and I can't believe it, but I was never in Cuba with him at the same time. But of course, I was never there without him. And here's the pleasure of fried rice. Reed and I will never forget the lesson in the Saul Landau kitchen on Morrison Street on how to scramble the egg on one side of the pan while keeping the rice separate prior to finally combining it, and to heat up the pan first. And of course, the sheer pleasure of eating and preparing meals. Saul befriended Phyllis Richmond before the word foodie entered the popular lexicon. Here's something else that I have so much to thank for Saul that Reed and I do. When you get recruited into Saul's land, into his work, into his world, you get recruited into his family as babysitter. Because one of Saul's daughter's name is Julia, spectacular Julia, about 25 years ago, his entire family and many more people around town, including my husband, now call me simply Swag, not Julia. Saul, we had to distinguish. Saul's responsible, too, for my meeting Reed because he hired the person, Dave Peterson, who's here tonight, an anthropologist, who in 1989 lived with my husband and introduced us. But I was too shy to let Reed know that I liked him, so one night when I was babysitting for Julia, I took her to a party at their house, and she scrambled in ahead of me and found Reed, and she did it for me. She said to him, "Swag has a crush on you." Fortunately, by then, at least he knew my last name. A couple of years later, pregnant with our first child, we had trouble finding a name if the baby was to be a girl. Carmen named her, and that's why we have an Isabel, who Rebecca helped deliver 19 years ago, a couple of weeks ago. So to Saul's family, all of you that are here and not here, Reed and I want to thank you all for this and so much more. And I want to close tonight, at least my comments, with some lines from Cicero's on the good life. This is a text that another much-loved mentor to many of us, Ping Ferry, pointed me toward a few years before he died. Laelius the Wise speaks on friendship with two visitors. Friendship, then, both adds a brighter glow to prosperity and relieves adversity by dividing and sharing the burden. And another of its very many and remarkable advantages is this: it is unique because of the bright rays of hope it projects into the future. It never allows the spirit to falter or fall. When a man thinks of a true friend, he is looking at himself in the mirror. Even when a friend is absent, he is present all the same. However poor he is rich. However weak, he is strong. And may I attempt to convey an even more difficult concept. And when he is dead, he is still alive. He is alive because his friends still cherish him and remember him and long for him. This means that there is happiness even in his death. He ennobles the existences of those who are left behind. Thank you.
Next up is Harry Belafonte.
Thank you so much, Mr.
Would you like this even higher?
No, no,
You're okay.
look, I have been pondering over this now for a long time. Well, not that long. Saul just passed away, so anyway, since he passed away, if there is a public platform and there is ceremony and we're going to be talking about what do I say. And as I sat back there listening to all those who have preceded me, they kind of filled the space very well. Saul was near and dear and extremely important to me in my life and my interests, and he constantly kept me informed, enlightened, and among a number of incredible gifts he had given me, he was the one that introduced me to the Institute of Policy Studies and brought me in, and then I began to meet Mark and meet John and San Ho and meet everybody, and I knew that I'd found finally a place where I could be nasty with love and say anything I wanted to say and know that whoever heard it within the purview of my voice would greet me with an embrace. I called Saul with great regularity, and he in turn did the same with me, and we talked about everything under the sun. One of the things where he was most critical and very important to my relationship with him was an opportunity that I got on one of our many trips to Cuba to be able to get to interview Fidel. And I called Saul and I said, look, I got this shot. I got a chance to talk to Fidel. I don't know exactly what time it'll be, but with my Spanish, I could get arrested. With my English, I'm sure to get arrested. And I just really need you to come down with me and not only help shoot some of the stuff I'll be picking up on the journey, but I want you to also keep me on point. We wound up at the National Hotel, and we're sitting down in the garden and waiting for word as to when Fidel will receive us. And while I'm sitting there, there's a bunch of kids sitting not too far from where we are. It's during the noontime. And we catch their eye, they catch ours. And after a while, I don't remember exactly all of the details, but we wound up sitting with each other. And I began to talk to them. They were black Cubans, and these young men. And I began to ask them questions. And Saul, who was most fluent in Spanish, and I spoke very little, so he became that critical force in this little drama. And as I would talk to the young people, I just said, you know, where are you from? We're from old Havana. And what do you do? And we're musicians. And said, and what kind of music are you into? And they said, rap. Oh. There is a community of rappers here in Havana? Yeah. Well, you know, I kind of know a lot of people in the rap world and a lot of people in Paris and in London, and certainly all the guys in New York and LA, et cetera, but I just never heard of the rappers here in Cuba. How come, well, do you have any records? And they said, no. I said, oh, why not? And he said, because we're black. And that struck me as terribly odd. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you know, we are rappers. The elite here in Cuba don't look very much at us as culturally important. And not only that, you know, we've got this racial divide here that's given us a problem. And with Saul, I'm digging deeper into this information. And I asked them if I could get them on camera. And they said yes. I said, well, let me do it after we've had a chance to speak with the president. While this conversation is going on, we get the invitation to come immediately. Fidel will receive us. So I go with cameras and with Saul, and we're meeting with Fidel. And our time allotted to us was a half hour. And I'll take anything I can get because I got to have this moment for the film we're making. So we get into the room, and Fidel says, how you doing? Fine. Are you enjoying your trip this time? I said, yes, very much. So what have you found? Anything new? And I said, yeah. I didn't know that you had rap in Cuba. And he says, rap. And then he goes off into a stream of Spanish. And he wants to know what is rap. And I tell him through Saul. And then I said, not only that, Comandante, I said, these kids tell me that there's some racial friction here. Oh, Havana is a color thing. They're not into rap. The Ministry of Culture isn't. And Fidel starts to speak, and he says, well, tell me more. What is this all about? So I go into it the best I can. I say it's a global music. It's on the lips of every child in the world. It's a youth communication that should not be dismissed, and I'm surprised. And just in the middle of that, with Saul interpreting, Fidel gets on the phone and makes a call, and he calls Pietro, the Minister of Culture. And now you understand, my half hour is burning up very fast. And in no time, Alberto comes over, and he begins to talk on rap and stuff and stuff and stuff and stuff and back and forth, and why do these young men, and the information flows. Fidel then says, you and Saul are with me for the rest of the afternoon. But I have a lot of appointments, and you'll just have to go with me. And so we go with him, and in between talking to all of the graduating students at the University of Havana Medical School, graduating class, getting ready to, well, they graduated, they were getting ready to ship out to go to somewhere in Latin America. And I'm saying, Saul, we keep talking, Fidel keeps pushing on the issue of rap. And I tell him what I know. I tell him what I know about the rap culture in America. I tell him about, I just finished a film called Beat Street, and I had Grandmaster Flash and Melly Mel and Africa Bambaataa, and he's listening to these names, and he's looking, And he talks to the Minister of Culture, and the Minister of Culture expresses some dismay, and not quite as articulate as the Minister of Culture usually is. And I then say to Fidel, I said, I need to ask you some questions that have nothing to do with rap. You gave me this appointment to come see you so I could talk about the things that I need to talk about for the film. And Saul translates. And At the end of my conversation with Fidel and Saul filming, Saul tells me that we have an appointment with Castro's brother, Raul. But more importantly, it's with his daughter, Marielle, and that she is the force, she is the one, she is the brightest. And we go on over to Marielle's house with the cameras, and we're setting up. And in the middle of interviewing her and talking about the gay movement in Havana and talking about color and rap and all of this stuff and getting a lot of good stuff because she is incredible, in comes Raul. And kind of late at this time in the day, and Raul is feeling no pain. And with Mariella's giving us cocktails and drinks and whatnot, it is not too long before Saul and I are feeling no pain. And we talk and talk and talk and back and forth. And I see at one point Saul says, wow, I never knew that. And I'm eagerly trying to find what it is that he never knew. And as Raul walks off into the other room for a moment, said that there was something that he had earlier that day with the intersection, and they were talking about something, and it's about flight over Cuba and stuff between the State Department. And in the middle of explaining it to me, we get back to the phone rings, and Fidel is calling, and he'd like to have us come back and finish up our conversation. Now I know that it'll probably be the most unique footage ever in the history of filmmaking with Fidel Castro, with Saul feeling no pain, me feeling no pain, Marielle giving us all this information, and we're talking about rap and the overflight that they gave permission. This gets very complicated as far as sorting it all out is concerned. So we get back to Fidel's quarters, and we begin to talk, and he says, so what have you been up to since I saw you a few hours ago? And Saul talks to Fidel, and he's telling him what he heard with Raul. And he said, you know, I never heard that before. I had not read that anywhere. I haven't seen it anywhere. And I need to know, how is it that such and such and such and such happened? And Fidel said, Raul told you that? And Saul says, yes. And he said, uh-huh. Well, let me cut this short. That's the last I've ever seen of the film. Somehow in this conversation, feeling no pain with Raul, there was some information imparted that, I don't know whether it's some great big bugaboo, but it could have compromised the Cubans' interest. And when we left the country, that portion of the film that we've been shooting all that day was confiscated. And I'm sorry about the fact that that happened. I was given opportunities after that a little bit later to catch up with Fidel again and have another go at it without rappers and without Raul. And it's moments like that, these coincidences, these strange little things that you never planned for, where you have an experience with someone and you know that it's special, it's unique, and sometimes it's just a confidence and a thing that happens that passes between the two of you. And if you try to explain that story to most people, they're not going to really get it, not understand it. But I just want to say to Rebecca and to the rest of the Mishpucha, I think Saul got that film back. And I just want to know if, in looking through Saul's artifact, and since I couldn't get to LA for the first tribute to Saul, and I had an opportunity to make this tribute to Saul, I thought I'd take advantage of this very sensitive moment and pay tribute to Saul to say, do you know where that goddamn film is? Saul was everything to me. When I had some of my toughest moments, I would turn to him and I'd get clarity. And I could speak to him about almost any place in the world and find that he was not only knowledgeable, but so gifted in the depth of his political analysis and what he had to say. What I missed most are those conversations, are those moments when so much is going on and you need somebody to talk to where you don't need to worry about how you phrase it, because you know he or she will get it right away. There have not been many of those people in my life where you can just think it and there's a response always with the right conclusion or the right direction. There's a guy by the name of Saul, just give me a second here. Jack Willis. Jack Willis and Pam and Mary and Saul, we were that unholy West Side, Upper West Side, New York group. And I couldn't come. I recently had a stroke. And it took its toll. I'm kind of lucky that it didn't paralyze anything. The clot sits at the base of the brain, but it makes flying and doing things extremely difficult. And at the time that Mary and Jack were going out to California to see Saul in the last visit, I was supposed to have been with them and couldn't make it. And they came back and told me what went on with Saul, and I spoke to Saul on the phone. I'll miss him dearly. And he and I often talked about God and is there a hereafter and all that stuff. Of course, he would have none of that. I was born a Catholic, and no matter how long I've been trying to purge myself of all that shit, I still find myself being tugged by my early tutorings as a kid, and I still wonder sometimes that moral force, maybe there is a God, maybe there is a hereafter. And if there is, wherever Saul is, that's where I'd like to go. And I hope I can see that film.
We're going to close the program with this special film I mentioned, which is a tribute to Saul by his longtime collaborator Haskell Wexler. While we're getting that queued up, I just want to also give another round of thanks to the whole Landau family for making the effort to come out here. His sister Beryl is here, Rebecca is here. It's so special to have you all in the room with us. so many other people. I can't name you all, but I want to call out Christian Letelier from the Letelier family to represent. So happy to have you here. I know we have representatives from the Cuban interest section, from so many other parts of Saul's life. I just want to thank you all for coming. And now we'll close out with this final film.
It's difficult, kind of awkward for me to be on this side of the camera, to talk to the camera, but I'd rather be out there with you, so when I say something, I just want to say it like I'm like I'm out there amongst you, okay? First, I think it's good and it's appropriate that it's the IPS that's holding this memorial, because you know, Saul was my friend for 50 years, and wherever we went, wherever he traveled, or wherever he lived, he always kept the Institute as his base, and the friends that he had at the Institute, interacting with them, so that the people at IPS and what they stood for were very much part of Saul's whole life, even when we went on our adventures. One of those adventures was, we called it Paul Jacobs and the Nuclear Gang. Saul's friend, Paul Jacobs, who with many other journalists were downwind of a nuclear test.
My name is Paul Jacobs, and I want to speak with Mr. John Harris.
Saul wanted to film for Paul, who was dying of cancer, was caused by the fallout of a nuclear test.
Due to a change in wind direction, the residue from this morning's atomic detonation is drifting in the direction of St. George. It is suggested that everyone remain indoors for 1 hour or until further notice. There is no danger.
Whatever changes have been made because we've been fighting for those. But we've got a long, long way to go.
Another one of what I'm just going to call adventures, when Saul took me to Chiapas, Mexico, where the Zapatistas were just forming. We gave Subcomandante Marcos our high camera, and later he used them for what he called his communiques.
¿Ya? ¿Le voy a poner la grabación o no le pongo? No, ya no. Bueno, se corta. ¿Así está bien? La gabardina. Listo. Buenas madrugadas, hoy es 1 de enero de 1996 y este es el programa especial del Sistema Zapatista de Televisión Intergaláctica. Estamos transmitiendo vía satélite a Oventic, en el municipio San Andrés, Sacamachén de los Pobres. Bienvenido a Chiapas.
I did a lot of shooting with Saul in Cuba. I do remember we were somewhere and Fidel spotted Saul. And I remember he came up and he says, "Oh, Landau, Landau." Just recently, Brazilians have been using our film, Brazil, to report on torture, as part of a program to expose the crimes of their previous government.
No quarto dia, sabendo que eu volveria à tortura, eu tentei a morte cortando meus pulsos esquerdo.
Uma cicatriz acá.
Cortando as venas de meu braço, numa tentativa de poner ao fim alterno a tortura e poder fazer assim uma denúncia verdadeira de que o Brasil não é mais o país solamente do samba, do futebol, de Pelé, mas é também grande campeão da tortura.
We were actually commended, as our film was commended by President Dilma Rousseff. Saul is happy that he saw that our work still affects the real world of change. And I guess you can say it's a kind of immortality. The last film I shot with Saul was his film on the Cuban Five. Here was a time when good people who happened to be Cuban blew the whistle on terrorists, and they're put in jail.
Cuba provided all kinds of evidence to the FBI. The FBI then figured out who were the people who were supplying the Cuban government the information.
Gerardo Hernandez was charged with conspiracy to commit espionage.
There was no any evidence of conspiracy to commit espionage.
I got a call from Saul not too long ago, very short time ago actually, where he said he wanted to say goodbye, and so we talked, not anything about all those films and the things I was just talking about, but we just talked about life and friendship and affection and all the things that, you know, when I think now speaking at his memorial, and even then, you know, it was pretty tough not to cry. Not that it was sad, but it was sort of unusual and profound to be able to talk with a friend who knew he was going to die, and we had just sort of a celebration of our friendship. And I sort of remembered a time where we were at a Pete Seeger concert, and he sang this song, Precious Friend, which I'm thinking about now, and so I tried to remember the words of the song because I wanna sing it, and hopefully you'll join with me, because that's why I'm here talking at this memorial. Let me think how it went. Let me see. I think it's just when I thought all was lost, you changed my mind.
You gave me hope, not just the old soft soap. You showed that we could learn to
share in time.
You and me in Rockefeller, I'll keep plugging on. Your face will shine through all our tears, and when we sing another little victory song, precious friend, you will be there, singing in harmony. Precious friend, you will be there. Hey, will you sing it with me? I'll give you the words. Just when I thought, just when I thought all was lost, all was lost. You changed my mind, you changed my mind. You gave me hope, not just the old soft soap. You gave me hope, not just the old soft soap. You showed that we could learn to share in time. You and me in Rockefeller, you and me in Rockefeller. I'll keep plugging on. Your face will shine. Your face will shine. Through all our tears. Through all our tears. When we sing another another little victory song.
And we sing another little victory song.
Precious friend, you will be there.
Precious friend, you'll be there.
Singing in harmony.
Precious friend, you will be there.
Player Steve.
Are you singing it? Ha ha!
Just a quick reminder from Greg. If you want to see these films, SaulLandau.com. Thank you all.